My name is Scott Woods. I'm manager with Broadband USA at NTIA in Washington, D.C. And I have the pleasure this morning of facilitating this panel. So let's get started. So first of all, I always know it's the morning time. I like to do just a little brief icebreaker before we introduce our panelists. Because we have a nice crowd here, if you can just shout out one by one kind of where you're from, not necessarily your title, but are you local government, North Georgia, Middle Georgia, South Georgia? Let's do that real quick, and I'll ask our panelists to get prepared, and I'll introduce them, and then we'll get started. So, sir.
Yeah, Eric Joyce. I'm from Madison, east of Atlanta and south.
Okay. So right here.
This is Grant from the city of Douglasville.
Right in the southwest corner of the state.
All right.
I'm from Sylvester, on the southwest.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Going back down here. We'll just go back row and row. Thank you. Thank you.
Douglasville, Middle Georgia.
Michael Evans, Centerville, right in the center of the state.
Thank
you. Melanie Winfield, City of South Fulton, south of Atlanta.
Greg Judy, Fitzgerald, Georgia, Local Utilities Commission.
Richard Newbern, City Manager, City of Cochran, middle of the state near Macon.
Okay.
I'm Karen Thornton. I'm with the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, but I live in LaGrange, which is West Georgia.
All right.
Susan Miller. I live in the city of Decatur.
Catherine Fleming. I'm with Charter Communications.
Good morning. I'm Steve Fry with the city of Williamston. That's in Pike County. If you do a triangle between Atlanta, Macon, and Columbus, we're right in the middle of those three.
Wonderful. Good morning.
Doug Holberg, City of Griffin, Spalding County, and also Three Rivers RDC board member. This is our top priority for the organization right now.
Craig Bennett from Pelham, Mitchell County, halfway between Albany and Thomasville, southwest Georgia.
Steve Sykes, City of Camilla, southwest Georgia.
Chris Addleton, Cairo, southwest Georgia. We're about 10 miles from the Florida line.
Good morning. Reggie Taylor, USDA, Rural Development, Athens, Georgia.
Good morning. I'm Steve Gooch, State Senator from Dahlonega. I'm here to learn about broadband from Dina Perry.
Did we get everybody?
Right here in front of me.
I'm Dan Ponder. I'm the mayor of Donaldsonville in southwest Georgia.
And so thank you, and good morning again. Becky, can you touch this? Your screensaver's on. We have a panel of distinguished individuals here that are going to talk about rural partnerships and specifically what it takes to succeed and be successful. So first we have Mr. Andrew Hayes, who's the General Field Representative from the USDA's Rural Development Telecommunications Program. Mr. Hayes is the General Field Representative based in Jacksonville, Florida. He provides outreach to discuss the broadband loan and grants programs, as well as the distance learning and telemedicine grant program currently governed by RUS. He works directly with broadband providers and education and medical providers to monitor the USDA's telecommunications program and the loan and grant projects in Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. After Mr. Hayes goes, I'm going to introduce Ms. Dina Perry, who's the Executive Director of Broadband for the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. Adina is the Executive Director, and she came to DCA from the Northwest Georgia Regional Commission, where she spent more than 3 years working with communities to develop broadband strategies. Prior to her time at NWGA, Dina worked for a local telco for more than 15 years. Next, we have Mr. Eric Snell, who's the President and CEO of Georgia Public Web, where he leads the team in deploying and supporting and managing a 3,500-mile fiber optic network across all parts of Georgia, providing services to many carriers, governmental organizations, and municipalities. Mr. Snell is bridged with working with large carriers while also aiding local broadband providers. And then last and certainly not least, on behalf of the city of Blakely, we have Mr. Charles Middleton, who's the city council member. He's been there for 14 years, and prior to that, he was chief of police, correct? And the city of Blakely recently constructed a fiber to the home project, and he'll give you a little overview of that. So with that said, that is the lineup that we have. And first we have Mr. Andrew Hayes, who will talk about the USDA's various funding programs under their telecommunications portfolio.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm going to set my clock so I don't go over time. All right, I want to talk about the USDA broadband loan and grant programs. I'll be talking about our Farm Bill broadband loan program. And that's basically, just to give you a brief overview before I give you the overview, the Farm Bill loan program is for areas where there's already broadband. So the good thing about that is in our other programs, we don't do funding for if there's any existing broadband. So in the Farm Bill loan program, if you've got a rural area you want to cover that doesn't have it, and also will loan you funds to serve a downtown area that may already have broadband, and that's normally where dense population is, honestly where the money is, and you can use that area to help subsidize service to the rural area. So that's one of the benefits of the Farm Bill loan program. Now the Reconnect program that I'll talk about, where we have grants, combination loans, grants, and grants, that's only for areas that don't have access to 10 megabit service, 10 megabit down, 1 service. So no competition there. And the same thing in our Community Connect grant program. That's for areas that don't have 10-1. So for the Reconnect program, you can get up to $25 million in grant. For the Community Connect, only $3 million. But I'll get into the scoring criteria on that. The scoring criteria for those two grant programs is much different. I'm going to skip through this slide. I don't know if we can change the how you do this so we can line up. Have to do that every time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
That's fine.
Yeah.
PDF.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, this is a PDF, so it's not quite lining up like the PowerPoint. Okay, this is our Farm Bill broadband program like I told you about. In this program, we only get about $30 million a year, but it does carry over. So right now we have about, I think we have about $60 million carryover, and we'll probably get another roughly $30 million in 2019. So like I said, you can get up to $25 million. It's actually it's for areas, broadband is defined in this program as 25 megabits down and 3 up. So actually this opens up some areas under our other programs that are not eligible. This area, broadband is defined as 25.3. So even if they're getting 25.3 service or above, we can fund under this program. And there can be 2 existing providers already providing service in the area, so we can fund the 3rd provider. Now, the only requirement here as far as unserved, in every one of these programs I'm going to talk about, the applicants draw a map on our mapping, draw the map of the area they want us to fund. In this particular program, right now through the end of the year, 15% of the households in that area have to be unserved, meaning they don't have access to 25.3. I'll get into some later slides. That's actually going to change next year because of the new Farm Bill. That's going to be changed to 50%. So under this program, next year, 50% of the households in the serving area have to be unserved. Remains to be seen if we're going to change the definition of broadband. That changes a little bit every year, so that may change. But for whatever it is, if we increase it, if the FCC decides to increase their definition, which is 25.3, 50% of the households will have to be unserved. As with all of our programs, you have to do a network design, and the design has to show that you can provide a minimum of 25.3 service to every customer in the service area. So when you're designing your area, your network has to show that you can provide 25.3 to everybody. These are just some other standard loan terms. As far as the loan, we don't cut you a check up front. You draw down the money as you need it, and it's based on the interest rate on the amortization of that draw. So, and we do our loan terms on the economic life of the entire project. So if you're buying fiber or electronic equipment, each of those different asset classes has its own depreciation rate, and it's weighted by the dollar amount you're asking for each asset. So if you're asking for a lot of money for fiber, we're probably going to, fiber has a 20-year depreciation rate. If you throw some electronics into that, that'll bring down the economic life of the project. So maybe it's a 15, 16-year term. We add 3 to it. So say you get a 19-year term. The first year you start drawing down money, you get the 19-year treasury rate that's in effect the day we wire you the money. So every advance has its own separate interest rate. But every advance in the first year gets the 19-year rate, and the second year we get the 18-year rate. So that's how we do it. Farm Bill highlights. The weird thing about the Farm Bill is they put a lot of stuff into it, and it remains to be seen whether it'll get funded. Really, the only important thing on this slide, like I mentioned, is the unserved household percentage is going to go from 15% to 50%. We know that's going to happen. The rest of this stuff is maybe it'll get funded, maybe it won't. So in the interest of time, I'll skip through this. There's a bunch of stuff in here that would be nice if we get it, like the Innovative Broadband Advancement Program. We're authorized to get it, but who knows if Congress will decide to fund it. This is just about reporting requirements. So I want to move on to our Reconnect program. We're just finishing up round 1 of the Reconnect program. We received $600 million in 2018 and another $550 million this year. The deadlines for the grant and the combos have already passed, and these are down at the bottom here. So for the 100% grant, the deadline was May 31st. For the combos, it was just recently June 21st, and we're accepting 100% loan applications through July 12th. Now we're going to have a round 2 on this of that $550 million. We're going to announce toward the end of this year. We're going to have the same 100% loans, grants, and combos, and it'll be roughly the same breakout. It'll be more or less close to $200 million for each funding type. I'm not sure what the deadlines are going to be, but you just have to stay tuned toward the end of the year when we announce that program. Basically, anybody can apply. The only entities that can't, individuals and sole proprietorships and startups. We don't fund startups. Okay. So to qualify to be eligible, entities have to have 2 years of unqualified CPA audits, which is our way of saying we don't fund startups. Fully complete application, it's basically like a business plan. You have an executive summary, you have a project budget, You've got a network engineering design, pro forma financials to show us the costs of the revenues, expenses of the project. There's an environmental questionnaire that basically you do several different types of questionnaires, and based on your responses to those, our environmental group will decide whether further environmental review is necessary. But if you're just plowing on right away or doing aerial cable, normally no extra review is necessary. Timely build out, you have to build out the project in 5 years. As far as financial feasibility, there's just a few financial ratios that you have to meet. You got to get 2 out of 3 in the 5th year of your forecast. A times interest earned ratio, or a debt service coverage ratio, or a current ratio, which is current assets over liabilities. In each of those, the threshold is 1.2, so it's fairly low. Technical feasibility, like I mentioned before, you have to have a professional engineer sign off on your engineering design, on your network design, and they have to certify that the design is capable of providing 25/3 service to every customer in the area that you map. Service areas in this program, broadband is defined, unlike the Farm Bill loan program where it's 25/3, in this program it's 10 megabits down, 1 up. So this is only for areas that don't have access to anything higher than 10.1. And for 100%, and this is based on households, for 100% grant, no household can have access to 10.1. For the combo 50/50 loan grant and the loan, it's 90%. So 10% can have broadband, but 90% can't have the 10.1. Fully funded just means if you need money beyond what we can fund, because we don't fund salaries and administrative expenses, if you don't have that, you have to show us that you have the capability of getting it from some outside source. I think I've gone through most of this. The grant scoring, real quick on this, is it's basically based on the household, or let's see, farms, businesses, educational facilities, healthcare facilities. So it's based on the different type of facilities you have in your service area. The biggest scoring criteria is density. You have to have 6 people per square mile or less. And then after that, it's based on for every farm that you pass that you can pre-subscribe, you get a point, up to 20 points. For every business that you pass that you can pre-subscribe, you get a point for each business. So it's really based on what's in the serving area. Now, our last program is the Community Connect Grant Program, where you can get $3 million. It's pretty competitive. We only get about $30 million a year, but the scoring criteria on that is basically based on needs. So you do a needs benefits write-up on economic development, public safety, educational, and healthcare. So it's basically how is this project, how is broadband going to benefit this area? And then you have, that's 50 points, and then you get 50 points for stakeholder involvement, which means you basically just get letters from businesses and residents explaining in their own words why they need broadband and how it's going to help them. And the third scoring criteria is the management experience of the applicant. So it's a much less restrictive scoring criteria, so it's based on needs, whereas the other one is based basically on how many farms and businesses and whatever that you have in your service area. So the Community Connect is a much easier one to score high on, but you can only get $3 million. And for the Community Connect, it's a 15% matching criteria. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you. And so while we get our next representative to come up, Dina Perry, Executive Director of Broadband for the Georgia Department of Community Affairs. The reason why we started off with the money discussion is as part of any partnership, you have to have funding. And so right now, the USDA has the perennial programs, funding programs under their telecommunications portfolios. In addition, I will also note that my organization, NTIA, we just updated our federal funding guide for broadband projects. So if you go to the Broadband USA website, you'll be able to download that, and that is the most up-to-date picture of all of the federal grant programs and loan programs and philanthropic sources where you can potentially apply to get money for your program. So next we're going to welcome up Ms. Dina Perry, the Executive Director for Broadband or the Georgia Department of Community Affairs.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this morning. Thank you to GMA. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the Georgia Broadband Deployment Initiative because it's so important to our state. How many of you are familiar with the Georgia Broadband Deployment Initiative? Okay, we have a few. We know one in particular may be extensively familiar with the Georgia Broadband Deployment Initiative. So, the state has been doing a lot in the last several years addressing rural broadband. It's certainly on Governor Kemp's priority list of things to address across the states, especially in the rural areas, and it has most certainly been on the legislators' mind. The Georgia Broadband Deployment Initiative, the framework was created out of Senate Bill 402 that was passed in 2018, and we just so happen to have the person here who really worked hard to see that legislation pass, and that's Senator Gooch. He worked really hard over the many years. I mean, it goes back beyond 2018, 2017. In 2016, I believe, he initiated a study, a statewide study on the issue, as well as coming back in 2017, presenting legislation, and then again in 2018 to see Senate Bill 402 passed. Also, there was more work in 2019 done to address the situation, and that was to bring the utilities into play and to give them authorization and the authority to be to serve broadband services, as well as our telcos throughout the state. That Senate Bill 17 was also passed, as well as Senate Bill 66. The House has certainly been doing their part. They have a House Rural Development Council, and it has been a priority of theirs. Recommendations came out in 2017 around rural broadband. Another thing that was passed in 2019 was to continue the House Rural Development Council, so we'll see them to continue to address this issue. So what is the focus of the Georgia Broadband Deployment Initiative? It's to bring, promote and bring services of high-speed connectivity to the rural areas. So this past year, the legislation went into play on July 1st. So what started was, then they created the Office of Broadband, the Executive Director Office, which is the office that I have, and that's held at DCA. But it's been a collaborative effort between agencies across the state. We are working hand in hand with Georgia Technology Authority. They are providing technical assistance as well as project management for the mapping effort. We're doing a statewide map to identify where the unserved locations are. We're taking that to a more granular level than what we see with the FCC mapping. So that's a big effort. The broadband plan we conducted this year, which we have completed and posted on our website. In addition to our 5 agencies, again, that is the Department of Community Affairs, Georgia Technology Authority, Georgia Department of Economic Development. We are also working with Carl Vincent, who is assisting us in the statewide map. We're also working with the State Properties Commission to identify state assets that can be leveraged, as well as the Georgia Department of Transportation. In addition to the 5 agencies, we have an advisory committee, and they've been really critical in giving us advice. We take things to them to see what they weigh in. GMA represents the communities across the state. Larry Hansen is one of our advisory committee members, as well as ACCG, AT&T, the Cable Association, the Georgia Economic Development Association, Georgia Telecom Association, the Georgia EMCs, and Windstream. They have all played a vital role. We meet monthly, as well as meeting with the 5 agencies every other month. We also consider the local governments a critical partner in this. You all, if we don't have your help and your support and your commitment to it, well, basically, frankly, I mean, it can't be done. So I think this is a great topic to talk about partnerships and how public-private partnerships are so important, how communities can partner with private providers to come up with solutions to how do we bring rural broadband to these communities where it's needed. So what do we do and what is our focus? Well, we're focused on what are the barriers. And it really comes down to a financial case, really. And so what creates that? Having access to finances, having access to capital, streamlining processes that can become costly or prohibitive when they take too long or too costly. So again, I want to bring up our mapping. That's what our focus has been throughout the year. We'll see that complete in another year. Our broadband plan we have posted on our website. We will be doing new versions as we collect new information, as we continue to research, as we continue to find solutions, strategies. We will update that broadband plan. This gives you an idea of what our focus is. So phase 2 mapping, where we will focus on the census block. The illustration on the left is the FCC. That demonstrates 4 census blocks. And when the FCC produces their map, if you have one location in a census block that receives service, then that's considered served. But the way that we're approaching it, we will look at all locations in a census block, and we will determine how many of those locations are not served. And that's what our end results will be on our statewide mapping. The other things we are doing in relations to funding, we're supporting the Reconnect funding. There's state activity points associated with that application. It's worth 20 points. In order to get those points, you have to have a broadband plan. No restrictions on utilities providing broadband services, and then a commitment to expedite right-of-way and environmental assessments. So we published the broadband plan on May 2nd. We have worked with the governor's office to get the letter of support and commitment on the expediting right-of-way and environmental assessment. We have assisted a number of applications for the May 31st and then again the July 21st applications. So in Senate Bill 402, some of the projects that was named in that was to create a state broadband program. So what we have been doing over the course of the year is developing those rules and regs. That's the formality that has to happen before we can actually put a grant program in place and a mechanism for which funding would come at a later date. On June 17th, we approved those rules. The One Georgia Authority, it will be the program that the broadband grant would be under, and we passed the rules on June 17th. Part of applying for a state grant would have priority points if you are a community designated community of broadband ready. This gives you an idea of what that process looks like. You can find it on our website, and what I would encourage you to do, currently we do not have funding for the program, but we do have the rules in place. We do have a process in which you can apply to be a broadband ready community designated for priority points. But I would encourage you to apply regardless of the grant, because what this does is this signals to a provider that you're a community who are prioritizing processes to expedite right-of-way and permitting, and who are inviting providers to come in and partner with you to solve the problem. So what can communities do? Number one, support the phase 2 mapping. Participate in that. Work with the counties. Work with whomever to support that effort. Identify assets within your community. What assets do you have that you can leverage? What resources? What funding resources? How do you think of your existing infrastructure resources? How can you be creative in thinking, how might I maximize those for a broadband solution? Also, develop public-private partnerships. Work with your providers. One of the things that I realized when I was working in Northwest Georgia is that, when you work on a water project or when you work on a sewer project, those are all in-house. So you have all the people at the table when you talk about those expansions, and you know where you're going with it, and everybody's at the table. And oftentimes when you're thinking about expanding a water or something like that, you could actually bring a provider in, and maybe there could be some cost sharing. Maybe could be some common interest. Maybe they can work with you and achieving their goals and your goals while you're all working on multiple infrastructure projects. So again, I will repeat this, apply for the broadband ready designation because, like I say, this signals the provider. It also, if and when we are funded through the grant program, it would give you priority points in the application. You can find information about the Georgia Broadband Deployment Initiative on our website. We have there you can see where if you are seeking Reconnect funds, there's information around the Reconnect program. There's information regarding our mapping. There's also information on how you apply to be a broadband ready communication. A broadband ready community designated. There is information forthcoming on how to have a broadband ready site designation. So you can find all that on our website. And here's some contact information. Again, our website, our email, and then again on the comprehensive plan and reaching out to our planning department for any information that has to do with model ordinance, comprehensive plan, and how you bring those comprehensive plans up to date.
Okay, thank you very much. So next we have, and I just ask hold your questions, we'll do an interactive Q&A after all the panelists will have an opportunity to speak, and then we'll open it up for questions and have an interactive discussion, which is the goal of this session. So next, please welcome Eric Snell, who's the president and CEO of the Georgia Public Web. So, Eric.
All right, all set. Thank you for having me. We're here to talk about rural broadband. And, you know, when you look at editorial satires, right, the cartoons in the newspapers, et cetera, it's really hard to find city, you know, dense area broadband comedy. But when you look for rural broadband, there's plenty out there. Your satirists know that there's a reflection back on life, that there's a problem out there that we need to solve. And that's why these satirists can see that. They can see the opportunities and what needs to be dealt with. Trying to bring this, use humor to bring it to life, right? Things that we need to deal with. We can't have, the farmer sitting there driving on his tractor, but he can't watch that economic recovery past him. He's got to be a part of it. Those are critical aspects to this. So as we go forward, there are items in your community that broadband brings to it, right? So your school kids, working hard up there as a team in the STEM kind of approach, telemedicine, and these are all from the NTCA group, right? Economic, your e-commerce activities with Amazon, et cetera. You come down, you've got economic development reasons, right? Obviously, your businesses are looking at it now saying, I can't put a factory where I can't have connectivity, right? Because a lot of these factories, we've got situations in Georgia where we've got factories coming in from South Korea, right? They have to have connectivity, otherwise they won't locate. That becomes one of those critical checkboxes. It's no longer power and water. There's another checkbox, which is broadband for a lot of these major factories. Then you've got your farms. The newest thing is running drones out on the farms for irrigation, checking water levels, etc. All that data has to be brought back, aggregated together to help those farmers learn and get better yields from their crops. E-government. Right? As we try to move forward on our municipalities and move into the next level of government services, it doesn't help if 70% of your constituents can't access your sites. It becomes a critical aspect piece. Then you've got the work from home. Right? The ability to telecommute, whether you're living in Rincon or Sylvania here, rather than commute every day into Savannah, you've got the ability to work from home. And then you've got the social media aspect. But you've also got then our youth, right? And how the youth are going to continue to latch on to technology and take it to that next level and see where they can drive it forward. And then you've got your normal activities of how you shop, right? Whether people are now shopping more and more on the eBays, the Etsy's, the Amazons, or they're getting their media alerts. Maybe it's that, hey, the Braves scored 12 runs last night. But it also could be things like, oh, there's a hurricane coming through. We need to make sure everybody's aware. All critical aspects that broadband helps to open up those avenues to increase livelihoods out in rural Georgia. So the question is, where's your city, right? So you've got your city sitting there with a community investment. You've got dollars that you can invest into your local aspects. But what do? You've got a branch that you could say, I'm going to do this community-owned. Nobody's helping us. We got to do this ourselves. You've got the ability to work with local partners. And there's ways that you can, like Dina was saying, there's ways that you can put the flag up that says, we're a city that's willing to help partners come in here and support. We're not going to do this ourselves. We want to have people help us. Or are you just going to sit back and rely on, 5G or AT&T, the large national presence, to eventually get to your community? All decisions that you as leaders have to make. So GPW was formed back in 1996, really, when the Telecom Act passed. It was a major act that passed, and GPW was formed by 32 Georgia municipalities. And what those municipalities said was, if we don't have high-speed internet out here, we're not going to have a community. Everybody continues to get sucked into Atlanta, the major metropolitan areas, whether it's Macon, Columbus, Savannah, and they're not staying out here in rural areas. So GPW has been moving along during that lifespan. We work with a number of customers, right? Whether they're local governments doing their own thing, the state government, K-12 opportunities, college and universities. So they all work with our network, the ISPs that are out in rural areas, as well as carriers trying to get to and from communities and enterprises, right? Sometimes it's your local attorney. He doesn't know what to do. We help them out. We get them connected, and that's important. It's important for your community to see that growth and see that retention of that customer. So we provide Ethernet across our network, right? So it's referred to in speeds, 3 megabits per second. Uh-oh.
I got it, quick.
Completely blown that. Up to 100,000, right, megabits per second, or what's called 100 gigs. When you look at that, the speed of that is dramatically different, but there are carriers that need connectivity between communities across the state, and we provide that connectivity. Local enterprises may need 3 megabit. I'll do a better job, thanks. Your local enterprise might need only 3 meg or 100 meg or a gig connection, but when you've got carriers that are aggregating traffic together, whether it's cell towers or video traffic, et cetera, they need massive pipes that connect back to the internet. That runs across our network, and I'll show you a map of what we have. We work with dark fiber builds and fiber leases, so carriers work together, a little bit of co-opetition where I've got network in certain places and a customer needs it diverse and separate from their current provider. We'll work together to make sure that it makes sense for that customer. So we provide internet access, and our reliability on protected services is at 6 nines and a 6, right? What that means is, from a percentage of uptime, our protected services are allowed to be down, meaning no connection, for about 10 seconds a month. That's it. Every day, every minute, every second of a month. We're allowed 10 seconds of a hiccup. Now, the other services that we provide co-location. That's where carriers work together to cross-connect and connect their networks together. We work on a Connect Georgia plan, which is helping communities register where they've got facilities that we can pull together and say, okay, if the law office that's located in Rincon and in Donaldsonville, how do they connect their offices together? Well, Donaldsonville's got the ability to connect and Rincon's got the ability to connect. We can put that together and help the customer. We also then provide support for our municipal technology. We've got experts in this business of running networks, right? Routers, switches, all that kind of gear. So we help out a lot of municipalities with decision processes. At the end of the day, I'm owned by municipalities. I don't want to make any municipality make a wrong step. So I'm a little bit conservative, but I'd rather be thinking in terms of how my municipalities think than trying to drive you into a decision that you may not want to make. And then DDoS mitigation, which is referred to as distributed denial of service. That's where somebody's doing an attack on a network, and so we help mitigate that for our carriers. So this is the GPW network as a map. You can see we cover a lot of Georgia. We don't cover all of Georgia. Those red pockets, those are not measles. There's no measles outbreak. Those represent a subset of networks that we relate to. Sorry, you can't see it. I'll give you a picture later. So these are networks that we connect to, right? So we don't solve the problem all the way across the state. It's too expensive to do that for anybody. What you've got to do instead is find the expertise where the expert that's in Donaldsonville can connect into my network, and I can drive him all the way to Dalton and Ringgold and solve that problem and keep that business there in Donaldsonville by having that connectivity. And then we have off-ramps off of our network. You can't really draw an arrow in Atlanta, but we carry traffic back, we pass it off of our network to other carriers, drive that internet traffic. And really, the only last piece I'll say, I saved you some time there.
There you go.
One key piece that you as a municipality can do is a policy called Dig Once. And a lot of it's starting to roll out from the West Coast, I think, is right now. I know there's some people in Idaho that are doing it, but you really need to look at it and say, if we're going to turn dirt over in our town, what do we need to do while that dirt's open? If there's a trench being built for a new water line, while that dirt is open, put some conduit in there. Now, conduit's not expensive. It's an investment in your community. But the next time a carrier comes in, after time, suddenly your conduit starts to connect. And when they come in, they don't need to tear up sidewalks or tear up roads. They come in and they talk to you as a city and say, what do I need to pay you to get access to that conduit to put fiber through there? It makes deployment faster, more cost effective, and it doesn't disrupt your city. So I would encourage you to go through and look at a Dig Once policy. We know of a city in Georgia that did it. They had a water main that was being built 7 miles long, and they made sure that when they opened it up, they just put conduit in there. And the city came and said, what are you going to use it for? And they said, I don't know, but it's in the ground. It's now an asset that's there. It's not going to go bad. And then what happened was a carrier came along and said, hey, I got to get to this town. And he said, hey, I'll lease you access to this conduit. All of a sudden, instead of having the cost of opening it up, trenching it, all those costs are gone now because you took the opportunity to say, let's be efficient with what we need to do in our community. Let's go ahead, while that trench is open, just put a piece of pipe in there and then cover it back up. You've already done the majority of the work and the cost of the work. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, sir.
Thank you. And finally, we have, on behalf of the mayor, Anthony Howard, the city of Blakely, we have a distinguished member of the City of Blakely City Council. We have Mr. Charles Middleton, who's going to talk about their fiber to the home project. Mr. Middleton.
We came up this morning outside the door out there, and I got drafted to do this for the mayor. So everything I'm talking about, I'm doing off of memory. So, and I'm 70 years old, so that might tell you something there. But we're like any city that's our size and in rural area. Every time we talk to somebody about coming to Blakely doing something, they want to know how much broadband we had. So we started looking at it from that originally, several years back. And then we got involved with getting it into Blakely by putting an antenna on our water tower and Screeder furnishing us with internet. Well, I was a test case at my house. I put the stuff in, and it was so much better than what we were getting from the one I was paying, till it just wasn't comparable. But then when we were furthering along in that, me and the mayor and the commission chairman and a couple of other people went to Albany because Albany was running Screeder at that time. And we went over there for two purposes. One was to look at the E911 center that Albany had, and the other was their IT program. And when we went over there, basically we were really interested in their E911 because we were building the 911 building, and we were wanting to kind of get some ideas about E911 setup. While we were over there, their IT guy said to us, come on, let me show you my operation. So we went over there, and he said that he could get on the computer and take somebody's service from 10 gig to 100 gigs just by programming thing in the computer. And then he demonstrated it, and the difference, and the quality, and all that just kind of struck us. And so the ride back to Blakely, we were all talking about getting the broadband to the homes in Blakely and businesses. And it started kind of from us thinking about that we decided, hey, for us to do that, we got to hire somebody that's more smart about this than us. So the first thing we had to do was go out and find a good IT person and bring that person on board so that we could put together and know what the financial obligation was going to be from the city of Blakely. Well, we hired that guy away from the city of Albany and brought him over there. He began to work things out for us, and he told us that we can do it for $3.6 million. And probably cheaper because y'all already got a lot of the thing that we need, such as right-of-way, you got poles to hang it on. It's easier to run it from the poles than it is to dig it underground and make it work. So listening to him, he committed $3.6 million that we had stored back for hard times. And we spent a total of $1.6 million, and we had it complete. And we are can give you anything when you come to Blakely in that broadband range, and we're advertising that so we get some folks to come maybe. But we used a lot of our employees already had, called the light department. We had the pole trucks and we had the workers, and there were 2 young guys in that department that the IT guy took. The IT guy from Albany that we hired, he brought another guy with him, and so 2 young guys at the light department and the 2 guys that really knew what they were doing, they put that together, and we saved quite a bit. And now we have it. If you got the money and can pay, you can get it most whatever you want in service. So it was a stretch for people who serve on the council because of the, when you hire a guy in IT, most of them are up around Atlanta, Albany, Georgia, or some bigger town, and they're making a lot more money than my folks in that little old town make. And so we hired that, and the information got out that this guy was making this amount of money, and we don't even have broadband yet. So it's kind of hard when you're sitting there looking out at those people to tell them, hey, we're doing it because it's going to be the best thing for us. Now, schools have benefited from it. Our hospital has benefited from it. Our lawyers have benefited from it. Our banks have benefited from it. And it's been a great service for our town, and we're hoping for better things out of it. And that's about all I've got to say.
Right. Thank you very much. That's pretty good from memory. They're very good. Give them a hand. All right, so this comes to the point of the session where we ask questions. So I'm going to ask a question first from the panel to get everyone in the right frame of mind of what we're here to do. So for each of you, I have a simple question, and we have about 20 minutes here. So the audience, as you get your questions together for our distinguished panel, I'm going to ask a question. So in your opinion, getting your field, funding, what Georgia's doing, networks, and what the city of Blakely has done, can you summarize for the group here, what are the elements, sort of the key elements or main ingredients of a successful partnership?
I think having all the right stakeholders at the table. I mean, it takes the local governments, it takes identifying a private partner, In some cases, there are some municipalities that have their own network, but in any case, you're going to have transport. Transport is that backhaul. It's that information highway, if you will, that will take it back to main hubs like Atlanta, like Jacksonville, like those different places. So regardless of whether you have a local network, you will still need those partnerships that can carry the transport piece. So it's multiple partners. It's your development authority. It's the local government. It's the private partners. It's businesses, frankly. It's your school system, certainly your school systems, because they have a great need for it. You hear a lot about the homework gap. And the homework gap is real. I've seen it where I'm from. You have students who have access to internet at school, but then they go home and they don't have the devices. And more, there's applications that are being developed for homework that is online, tutorials, online testing, prep testing. I was reading an article just the other day where more and more they're creating these applications assuming that everybody has access to internet, and they don't always do. Your small businesses, e-commerce. I've shopped in local retail stores on a Saturday where their internet was down and they could not accept a debit card or a credit card. Now imagine what that does to revenues in today's society when probably, I would say 90% of your transactions are probably through a debit card or credit card for that day's revenue. So when you think about the impact on what it can do to your local community, and certainly healthcare. I mean, healthcare is very much relied upon that, to have those facilities that are satellite or a facility that's affiliated with a larger hospital that may have an urgent care in your community, but they don't have high-speed internet where they can connect and communicate back and forth. That just attracts your healthcare and makes your healthcare more robust. So I would tell you that there's multiple partners that you need that will help your community.
I was just going to add on that each party needs to understand what winning means when you're drafting an agreement. You've got a city that wants internet brought to them by a carrier that needs to look at a return on investment. And it's critical that both parties understand that, right? That some cities want to say, well, I want broadband, but I'm going to make sure that I'm getting paid this, and this. Well, if it doesn't work and make sense for the provider, then we've got to figure out how that solution needs to be reset. Because at the end of the day, it's about your constituents getting connectivity. That's the key driver. So we've got to make sure that everybody that's involved, whether it's 2, 3, or 4 partners, that it's a win to each of them, that you're sharing it. Because at the end of the day, it's going to take everybody accepting a little bit less of a win than they're used to make sure that the community wins as a whole. So.
And as far as the funding goes, when you apply for funding from us, there's definitely a bunch of key partners, I think, that have all been discussed. One is, when you complete your network built out for your local area, you have to connect to somebody. You have to get to the internet. So that's where an entity like Georgia Public Web comes in. So you need to have multiple connections, redundant connections, in case some fiber gets cut. You also need a professional engineer. I think the city of Blakely used Engineering Associates, but there are a lot of good professional engineers out there. And one of the first things that needs to be done is you need to do a market survey to find out what the demand is in your area. But you really can't do that until you have a good idea of what you're going to have to charge to either repay the loan, or even if the network is built out with a grant, you still have salaries and administrative expenses. So you have to figure out, what do we have to charge to break even, or to maybe even make some money on this. So before you do a market survey, you have to get an engineer to tell you what your costs are, so you know what you need to charge. And if you're a municipality that's not already in the business of being an ISP, internet service provider, and you don't have the staff, the other partner is you need to find an ISP that's willing to run your system for you. So in our programs, if you're a municipality, you're eligible to apply, but you have to show us that you have somebody that can run the system for you, at least until you can train your own staff to do that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am. Get a microphone to you in 1 second. I'm sorry.
Mayor, who is your provider, and how large is your community? How many citizens do you have? How many square miles is this infrastructure?
How many square miles in the city?
Is Blakely?
The whole county is only 525 square miles. The city of Blakely is, well, population-wise around 11,000, and majority of it lives in Blakely. The rural area of Blakely, or what Blakely covers, is probably around 5 square miles.
And do you have multiple service providers now in Blakely? Internet service providers?
That was the trouble. We only had one provider because it's not real money-making issue with them, and so the quality wasn't there, and they recently filed bankruptcy, so the service just wasn't there, and we were dissatisfied. Our business community was dissatisfied, so that was the reason that we looked at it and we took the jump.
So do you own, is it a public network? You own it?
The internet part, we run it.
Okay.
And we manage that Scarita that we got started with. Albany was managing it, and then they dropped out, pulled out. And the city of Blakely and Early County picked it up and started managing it. And they pay us so much a month to look after it. We send our people any breakdown or anything tears up in Cochran or over toward Moultrie or anywhere like that, we do that. We also train some of our people to be tower climbers and got them certified, got them trained, and now we keep those towers up for them too. Yes.
Okay.
And then how many employees do you have now dedicated to running that, would you say?
I think it's 9, but I'm not positive.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No, we pulled IT out. It's separate. We've also bought a building, and it's going to be our IT building, and everything with them is down there.
Yep. There's a question right here.
I'm from Douglasville, and we're 10 miles from Alabama and 10 miles from Florida. So, and I know we've had some discussions with some of the panelists over the past. But the question, what do you do to have a good partnership? You have to have partners, and we never felt like that we were ever going to get anywhere unless the city itself took over, and so we own our own. And our method was high-speed wireless.
Mm-hmm.
Our issue, which I've not seen come up in any of the recent material that you've seen over the last year or two, is the licensing. Mm. And so we have license in the city, which is owned by Sprint, although Sprint has no presence in the county and never has. And a lot of the county is, our preferred method is using educational bandwidth, which is owned or overlaps by entities outside of the state, other school systems in Dothan, Alabama, Marianna, Florida. And I just wondered if there's any work done in that area by the state or other entities that it says what we wound up doing is hiring our own attorney that specializes in FCC stuff in Washington, which is a struggle for a small rural community, and we're patiently trying to work through waivers on licensing. So
that's good.
That is the roadblock that we've hit. Everything else is working fine.
So that's a good segue. Let me ask the panelists a question. We've talked about the sort of licensing requirements. We touched on right-of-ways. Can you think of any regulatory burdens that could be eased on the local, state, or federal level that will help communities either attract a provider or further out, build out broadband infrastructure? So for example, you've talked about the adoption of right-of-way, dig once policies, right? Where the community, when you're doing a highway project or a sewer project and the ground's already open, you've already have that opportunity or that capital cost of constructing whatever you're doing, road, street work. Does it make sense to adopt policies that will allow the infrastructure to be put in and ease the access of attracting a partner?
Yeah, and I won't go back down that path because I absolutely believe that needs to happen. But I think you're hitting on a good point. And the problem is it's where to govern from, right? So spectrum's governed at the federal level, rightly or wrongly. The difficulty is when there's an auction, there's 5 people that go to the auction, right? It's T-Mobile, it's Sprint, it's AT&T. It's the same characters. It's not the city of Donaldsonville going to get spectrum. And that's a challenge, and I think the USDA and I think the state are trying to figure out how to bring those funds down at a different level. And I think that through trying to assess how do we get more people involved into this process, right? We don't need to do a spectrum auction where it's across the country you're going to own X spectrum because it's going to be the same characters. But last year there was a big CAF 2 auction, and that was done by the FCC. And that was really driven it was open, it was nationwide. You picked the census blocks that you wanted to provide service to, and you bid on it. I won't go into my personal thoughts on the whole thing, but the whole idea is because of technology, we're starting to see the ability to open up auctions and grants, et cetera, to a wider audience. Because at the end of the day, the USDA couldn't process through 50,000 applicants, right, 6 years ago, but now they can put together a system so that if you've gone through all of these gates, then that means you've gone all the way down this process already. It's already limiting out people. And it's not the USDA that's having to filter it, it's automatic filters that are going through. So you're able to get more people involved in the process. And as you do, you'll have more solutions that come up. It's still going to be difficult to get word out. Andy says, okay, pay attention at the end of the year for next year's grant. Because Andy can't call me and say, the grant's going on, it just opened up. All they can do is say, we've put it out there for people, and you just have to pay attention. But that's going to have to continue to evolve to get more people into the system, into the opportunities to pursue them.
So the licensed spectrum, as Eric mentioned, licensed or unlicensed, it's managed at the federal level, so there's not a lot we can do at the state level. But what I would encourage you to do, the answer to Scott's question, are things that you can adopt. What can you do? A model ordinance. So across the year, we worked hard and worked with a working group. It was represented by PMA was on the working group, as well as ACCG. We had providers who had provided input into developing that model ordinance. You can find it on our website. And what this does is, what it's doing is encouraging, for there to be a more normalized model ordinance. One thing that's for sure, a network does not really have limitations of where a census block border is, where a jurisdiction line ends. If you're building a network, it may cross multiple cities. It's certainly going to come in and out of a city and a county. But if you have to permit, doing different permitting processes at different costs, then that slows the effort. And at the end of the day, what a provider's trying to do is get to done so that they can start turning a revenue. And if the longer it takes and the more costly it is, the more barriers there are and the less interested they are going to be in building out that network in that particular area. So they're going to be more encouraged, more motivated by a community that they can go in, build out, and be done and get to where what they're trying to do, and that's turn a service and turn a profit, quite frankly. So to standardize those model ordinances would be very helpful, because that would streamline the processes and expedite it for them so that they could get there and we'd have a more standardized process across, not just in one county, but multiple counties. Because as I said, networks don't have limitations on where a county line is, where a city limit is, or even a census block. They build wherever they need to go and wherever they can go.
I have a question from the...
Oh, just real quick.
I'm sorry.
From a funding standpoint, Well, as has been mentioned, we don't have anything to do with what the FCC does as far as auctions. And I think in the past they have had auctions that are only available to smaller companies or municipalities, and they excluded the big companies. But I don't know if they're going to do that in the future. But as far as our programs, some of them fund spectrum. You can use our grant and loan funding to buy it, and others you can't. So the Farm Bill loan program that I talked about funds spectrum. The Community Connect grant program, the one where you can only get $3 million, that funds it. But under the Reconnect program, somebody decided we don't fund spectrum in that program. So we just keep getting these programs, and instead of when someone decides something needs to be changed, they don't change the program, they just give us another one. So we just have all these different programs, and each of them have different eligibility requirements, and we fund this under this program, but we don't fund it under that program. So you just have to, if you just have to research the different programs and find out what the requirements are and pick the one that's the best fit for you.
Okay. Question here.
Andrew, you touched on that just a little bit about what I was about to ask, but let me take it a little bit further. I'm in a community that's halfway. We've got two ISPs. One is pretty decent. The other one is sad. And it really depends on where in the community you live as to which of those ISPs is available to you. We have had people contact our city about the potential of assisting them financially in running fiber to get from Augusta to Atlanta and opening up co-location facilities based on that and all those kinds of things. And one of the difficulties I've had is actually being able to define rural for funding purposes. So is there a standardized definition for rural broadband, and what is that available for if that definition is standardized?
Well, rural is just, again, in each of our programs, the applicant draws a map of the area that they want us to fund. So inside that map, you cannot have a community that has a population of more than 20,000 community. We make it real easy on the map in that areas that are urban that don't meet that category are shaded in red. So when you get on our mapping tool, you know exactly what's rural and what's not. You can't draw your map in any part of the red area. Actually, you could, but you'd have to show us that in that red shaded area, you're using your own money. And in the other part, you can use our money. So we make it real easy to tell what's rural and what's not.
Any other questions from the audience? We have a question over here.
A follow-up question to what you just mentioned is the data that you're using for those classifications coming from the U.S. Census?
For rurality?
For population density?
Yeah, it's the latest census, right.
Okay, and in your various programs and your applications, do you have kind of a minimum mapping size, or can a project be any size?
It can be any size. Again, in different programs, well, in the Community Connect program, your service area has to be one single contiguous area. In the other programs, you can have multiple separate areas around the state, in different states if you want. The only really limitation is the amount of funding that you can request. So for $25 million, you can, and there's also a build-out timeline. You have to be able to get it done in 5 years. So there's no limitation other than the amount of funds you can request, and you have to show us that you have the ability to build out the network in 5 years.
So, another question? You don't have to apologize. That's what this is for. So we got another question here. Let me ask a question while you get prepared for that. One of the big sort of pushes now on the federal level, and Dina talked about it, is the importance of new mapping initiatives. Again, to understand where exactly your underserved and unserved areas are. So if you can just touch on just briefly the importance of the community members supporting the mapping efforts, working with your community colleges and institutions of higher learning within the state to be able to provide more granular granular data that will help identify those unserved and underserved areas, which will then help both the focused resources of the Georgia Department as well as on the federal level with the USDA. So if you could, Dean, if you can touch that, and then Eric, if you can touch that, then we'll go to your question. Thank you.
I mentioned, the map of record right now is the FCC, and their methodology for identifying an unserved area is based on census block level. So if you've got one resident or one location that's in that census block that is being served, then they consider the entire census block served. And the way that happens is, you could have maybe a network, a location that just crosses over into that other census block where it's being served in a neighboring census block, so now it's captured. So it's overstating the unserved area. Well, where that becomes important, if you're applying for funding, or if you're looking for a USDA, or you're looking for other federal, and certainly if the state funds a grant program, and you've got an area that's been identified as served, you wouldn't be eligible for service or for funding. So it's really critical to get it down to the location level. Providers report on Form 477, and this is the locations they serve. And that's the information that the FCC is collecting. So our approach at the state is going to be, and we're under development now, is identifying those locations. And how we do that is by collecting every address that is a potential subscriber in a census block. And then we look at it, compare it to the providers who serve that area, and see if they in fact serve that location. And through that process, we determine what locations are not served. And when we do that, once we have that, then we can better target and direct funding to the areas that are unserved. And it's more precise, and we can understand what the cost might be. It might help a provider understand where they might design a network. Where are those clusters? So it's providing a lot of technical support to the communities, maybe partnering with a provider who is serving that area, who might be able to edge out their network, and leveraging existing assets with a more granular information.
Okay. We have time for one final question, and then we'll wrap up this session. So, please.
Okay, so this question is about sort of what do we do when we have it. So I'm working in two communities. One community has the fastest broadband in the Western Hemisphere. The other community that is now my priority, we're still looking at broadband infrastructure. If we're going to go off this funding ledge where we're taking on quite a lot of debt to build this out, have you seen sort of model communities that once they get this broadband, they've been able to market it well to help drive revenue towards that debt, that community debt? Because we have 10 gigabits in one community, and we're still trying to figure out how to leverage that and market that appropriately. We have another community that's just building broadband, and we want to try to build a sustainability plan as we're starting to look at funding a capital stack that's going to get us this infrastructure and how to drive revenue on the other side of that. Have you seen successful communities really market it well?
There are communities in Georgia that have taken this step years ago, and there's communities even today that are starting down those processes. I mean, nationwide, there's a number of municipalities that have put in fiber to the home that have driven that process, and they're not necessarily, they're focused on bottom line revenue, right, and generating a return, but they also are looking at it as, I'm getting other benefits my municipality is by having this in place, whether that's economic development and whether it's education of the youth, et cetera. So there's other ancillary benefits. They're hard to quantify. There's hard to put a dollar value to it. But I will tell you, there's communities around the country that have driven fiber to the home, and they're successful with it. And we can talk afterward as to all the details, because there's, I know that there's several in Georgia that are doing it and have been doing it. And there are several around the country as well that are up in the Northeast that have done it. But they've also done it with a mentality of, they've tried to go to their local partners to get them to invest in it, like you said, to edge out their network, right? Like, if my network already goes to those chairs, it's not that much for me to get to you. It's a matter of what do I need to do? Now, how do we work to make that a win for both of us, right? Because at the end of the day, you're saying, I don't want to get in this business unless I have to. But if you're not going to support me, I'm going to have to do it. But if I go into it, I'm going all in, right? So I'm going in to win, and it's going to make the carrier not go in the future, and that's okay. But you've got to drive that. But you've got to have a city that isn't looking necessarily at what 2019 revenue is going to be, but what does 2025 look like for your city, right? And years ago, that's what Georgia Public Web Cities did. They said, if we don't do this, nobody's going to do it. We've got to do this for our city's livelihood long term.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have for today's session. I'm going to end here in 30 seconds. First of all, let's give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. Would also like to take a few seconds to recognize the staff at GMA, not only for holding the annual conference here, but for this particular session. So Becky Taylor, Pam Helton, please stand. Give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Terrell Jacobs, who's speaking at another session, so thank you all for your efforts. And then finally, I know we can talk about this all day, but I want to announce that on October 2nd, GMA and NTIA we're going to sponsor a follow-up broadband conference back in Warner Robins on October 2nd. If you recall, we were there last summer. We're going to do a follow-up this year where we're going to track the progress of communities and really have some concrete examples of what communities have done since last year's conference. So you'll get more information on that from GMA staff as we move forward throughout the summer. So thank you again, panelists. Thank you, everyone, for your time and attention this morning, and we'll follow up with you very soon. Thank you.